Good afternoon, everybody. So glad that you could join us for this town hall. And I want to say a special welcome. Thank you, Joel, for putting your name and where you're coming from into the chat. That's always good to know. I want to point out that Reverend Bill Worley is here from Penn Southeast. Where are you? One of my colleagues. And Reverend Dr. Bonnie Bates is here from Penn Northeast. I saw her name. Her face is not on my screen, but I know she is here.
The camera isn't working on how
We will probably mute you as you come in if you have not muted yourself. Okay, well, let's get underway. I'm Carrie Call, as most of you know, and welcome to you from whichever conference you're coming from for Penn Central's third and final town hall. And our focus today is going to be on the role of associations in a possible new Keystone conference, as well as a review of the timeline, which I think some of you have already seen, but we'll do it just for refresher's sake and in case there's any questions that come out of it. Hoping that you all received the packet of things ahead of hang on. Excuse me just a sec. My umbrella went awry. Apologies for that. Okay. Hoping that you received the packet of documents that kind of looked like this on the front that had the information about the associations and the timeline included in it. Hoping that you got a chance to see that. If you did not, after today, we'll make sure that it comes to you. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is share my screen and we will start going over some of the association points. This is the document that I'm hoping you have received in advance that has the information regarding the associations. And we'll just start with talking about some of these things. I want to remind everyone that conference cannot make any decisions about factors that affect an association. Now, this came up a few weeks ago at a meeting where somebody told me that there are some who feel that we are going to be somehow forcing associations to merge or forcing them to come together to do their ministry. And that is not true because the conference does not have that power. Only the association can make changes to an association in terms of its boundaries or its ministry or its constitution and bylaws. All of those things are done by an association. So that is not something that we would be able to change or affect. Paul, we got some people in the waiting room. Okay. So if there are questions about that part, we can come back to that and have a discussion about it. But we will not be doing any of that type of work. Included in this document at the end are the bylaws and information from the Constitution of the United Church of Christ, which shows exactly where the points are that dictate how an association works. And it's not under the aegis of the conference in any way. So you retain your independence, and that is not something that we can affect. So the question has been asked, if we do have a new Keystone Conference, what are the expectations of an association in that? And we have a number of expectations, which I'm hoping are things that associations feel that they can rise to. The first one is engagement. All we mean by this is that the churches in the association and the association leadership itself will be willing to be in a relationship, a mutual relationship with the conference going forward, and in relationship with all of the churches within that association. We're aware that some associations are stronger than others in that they have very tight relationships already, either with each other or with the conference. But that engagement piece is going to be really critical. And we want that to be considered as part of our covenantal relationship, something that people feel they can rise to and get involved with. I will say this in all honesty, that if a church is currently not particularly engaged with the conference, then a merger, they may not be particularly engaged with the conference after a merger. If you are engaged before a merger, likely you'll be engaged after a merger. So we're hoping that we can beef up that engagement and that recognition and sense of relationship going forward. And that would be very, very important to the working. So that's the very first thing that we're hoping for from associations. But we do have some specific things. And I know there's been some talk or fear of increased workload for associations. So let's just go over a couple of those things. The first is onboarding of new clergy. Now, some of that has been done by the conference in the past. Nora, for example, in Penn Central, always has a packet of information that gets passed to new clergy when they are installed at their church. And that provides a lot of information. But when we say onboarding, we're talking about relationship building and wanting people to feel welcomed in and recognized and included within their association. Some associations already do this very well. Others, maybe not as well. That's something that you can discern for yourselves. The other piece that's here is when it comes to how you welcome new clergy, we're talking about things like fellowship opportunities and ministerium and invitations, regardless of where these clergy have come from, regardless of whether they're UCC or not, whatever their background, that they will be fully welcomed and embraced into the life of the association. That is something that we will be expecting associations to do and keep track of, obviously, their new clergy, which most of you do anyway. Now, the next one is something that, at least in Penn Central, we've had a designated staff person for, and that would change in a Keystone Conference. We do not have that position in the staffing structure that we've put forward. So what we would expect is that clergy care and pastoral care be done largely by colleagues within the association. Now, some of you do this, and that's incredibly appreciated, and some do it very, very well. And they do the hospital visitations and take care of each other in times of need and so forth. And that's what we're hoping for all associations. When I think about the way some associations have already embraced this and already do it, that gives me a great sense of hope. Now, that doesn't mean the conference isn't interested. We will always want to know what the pastoral concerns are. Who is ill? Who is grieving? Who has been going through very difficult times? We always will want to know that. And we want to be able to share pastoral concerns across the entire conference when people agree to that. And we will do that as the conference. But when it comes to the actual visitation and regular check-ins and so forth, we would need help with that from the associations. And I don't think that's an onerous task. I certainly hope it's not. And that is one of the things in the Constitution and bylaws that an association is set up to do. And the assumption is that an association will be doing that type of work. So besides the pastoral care of association clergy, there's also search and call team support. And this is still in its imaginary, not totally imaginary, because Penn Northeast already has it, but it's in an imaginary stage in that we're starting to think about what this would look like. Search and call, as most of you know, is our biggest challenge right now, is finding clergy for our churches. We envision putting together teams of search and call workers, similar to what's happening in Penn Northeast, and we certainly will take whatever learnings we can from Penn Northeast to put those teams together and really hope for a 2 to 3 members of an association. They can be retired clergy, they can be active clergy, they can be active lay people who have served on a search committee. Sometimes they're the very best to help other search committees in their work. Those are the kind of people that we're hoping for. And we want those people to be known by the association executive committee so that someone is always keeping track of who those people are and what they're up to. And the regional conference minister, if we're talking about a Keystone conference, the regional conference minister would be directly in touch with those individuals and pulling that team together. So that is something that we've just started working on and thinking about. It's complicated and it's challenging. And so we're hoping that we can really pull people together and help each other out, because the search and call situation, as Nora can tell us from her recent meeting with the Lutherans and the Presbyterians, is hard for everyone. And we really need to be stepping up and helping each other the best that we can. And we're talking about more shared ministry, authorization of lay leaders into lay ministerial positions, and really working on that. There also would be a president's council, which would be established for direct communication with the executive conference minister. And the president's council would meet on a regular basis. We don't know if that would be quarterly or 3 times a year or what have you. But the expectation for an association is that the association president would be willing and able to serve on that committee, that council, and be fully engaged. That will be very important. That's going to be one of the only ways that the executive conference minister is going to have regular contact with association presidents to be learning about what's going on at the different settings within the association. So that president's council is something that we actually feel kind of excited about, because it will open up avenues for communication and engagement and relationship building. I'm not hearing anybody interrupt, so I'm just going to assume that they're just going to keep going till we're done here. One of the other things that we hope for is that associations will be willing and able to provide the conference with names of people who have passion in particular areas or a certain set of skills in a particular area. And that's because we are going to be utilizing the team approach to this ministry within this conference. So we're talking about teams for conflict resolution, teams for search and call, obviously, financial teams, teams for church vitality. We're going to be working on all of that. And so we're hoping that by working with associations, we can use our own expertise to be able to manage these teams and build these teams. So for example, I just learned earlier today that there's a great guy who's a CPA who's in one of our churches, and he's super engaged and involved. And I, of course, immediately thought, well, here's somebody whose expertise we might be able to draw on. That's true of retired teachers, retired nurses, retired social workers. I mean, we have the resources. We have the people. They're not always easy to pull together. I know that, but we do have the people, and we're committed to working with associations to try to find some of those people. And because I know one person on this call who will probably say to me in the question session, where are they going to come from? One of our hopes is that as associations might be working together, which we encourage, we can't make you do that, but we're really hoping that associations would be working together, that will free up some people. Because think about it, if you have a committee on ministry for 2 associations instead of 1 for each, that's going to free up some really good people, volunteers who want to give to the church in different ways. And we're hoping that maybe we can draw from some of those. All of this is going to require energy, obviously, and encouragement going forward. If that all makes sense, then let me tell you what associations receive in return, or clergy receive in return from the conference. The number one thing will be education and training, that is resources. Resources for not just clergy in terms of continuing education and boundary training and poetry groups and all these different little working groups that we have, communities of practice and so forth, but also education for laity. And this is something that Nora and I, at least for Penn Central, have been talking about a lot lately. What are the most important things we need to offer that people can dial into and really get some good training for presidents of councils or consistories, or for pastor parish relations committees, people who are chairing those? What kind of resources can we provide? And there are so many that we have already been thinking about and looking at. And we know, again, we've got the human resources in this Commonwealth to be able to do some of that education of and for each other. So that is a really big issue. And I know, Amelia, even before you say it, that we do have areas in the Commonwealth who do not have access to internet. And we are very aware of that. So we've been talking about what's going to be possible for some of those people who are in areas or in churches who don't have that kind of connection. Regular infusions of best practices. Nora and I have been talking recently about series of videos that are going to become available, the kind that she, for those of you who are part of Penn Central, that she made during the pandemic, which became available to people and were used quite a bit during the pandemic. Regular written communication from the executive conference minister to the association executive committee. As it turns out, that's a really important piece, that association executive teams want to know what's happening with the conference minister, the executive conference minister, and they want it on a regular basis so they feel that they have a sense of what's happening. And I think that's a fantastic idea. The President's Council, I mentioned again just quickly, which would meet on a regular basis. And then committees on ministry, which Bonnie and Nora can probably speak to, which, as we've said all along, the staff will always be connected with committees on ministry. Always, but they may not be at every committee on ministry meeting. And the more committees on ministry who feel comfortable with Zoom calls, the better, because travel is a huge part of this. And a Keystone conference would be starting off with around 20 committees on ministry. And so there's no possible way that all of our staff would be able to staff all of that, plus the other things they're going to be expected to be doing, like overseeing search and call. So that will be a change, but there will always be somebody who will answer the phone answer your questions, get the information to you. That will definitely be the case. There's also a note there about the mid-assessment team. We're hoping to see more of those developing. Support when it's requested. So support specifically around church conflict, church closure, vitality, financial issues or financial advice. We're going to have teams that are going to be available for this type of thing. And so you will always have somebody who will respond to you in your need, but it may not be a staff member. It will be somebody working as part of these teams that will respond to you and help you. And so that's an important thing for everyone to know. No one's going to be left hanging in the cold. There will always be a way to contact the conference, and the conference will not let you disappear. As long as you also are reaching out to the conference and stay engaged with the conference. If the vote passes and we move towards a Keystone conference, we're going to need this mutuality to really strengthen and build. We're going to need churches to say, yes, I'm putting my apron on and I'm going to become part of this relationship and I'm going to get to work with it. If not with the conference, then at the bare minimum with the association. And I know that people in the associations already feel that's important. So continue that. So the search and call team, as I mentioned before, we will also promise to clergy and churches reliable, scheduled, clear communication. Will be digital communication that will tell you what you need to know, but working also with the assumption that clergy will pass on information to the congregations. That doesn't always happen, as it turns out, but we'll be expecting that. And the steady, reliable social media usage and videos and so forth that allow for conference staff to be present in multiple settings at different times. And we have constant, church anniversaries and things like that, celebrations. And we want to find ways for us to be present at those, even if we're not present in person. So we'll be working on that. The last piece of this document is, as I said before, just the what the Constitution and bylaws have to say about associations. So I'm going to stop sharing and hoping that we might have some questions, or let me ask first, Bill or Bonnie, do you want to add anything into that about committees on ministry or anything else?
I think you covered it well, Carrie. Thank you.
Bonnie or Nora, do you want to say anything there about committees on ministry?
I think my only comment about committees on ministry that I'm talking with folks about right now is trying to make language, at least the language, consistent across the conferences and associations, even if the processes are not completely consistent, because we call things some different things. So we're working on a glossary, and we're working on the Committee on Ministry chairs, helping us align our processes as much as we can without asking associations to do something different than they've always done, unless they desire to do that as a best practice. So that's the only thing I would add.
Yeah, and we know that consistency is really important. Trying to get that across the Commonwealth if possible, obviously without coercion. Nora, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think it's been covered. I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. So, what are your questions and your concerns? Oops. Now we're going to get rid of that. Okay. So what are your questions and concerns?
This is Susan Emmons from Penn Central.
There you are. Okay.
Could you just, in very briefly, um, outline for us how how you envision the fitness review, so it's going to be unified or regional as opposed to within one committee on ministry? Can you just briefly walk us through that process?
Nora, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. And as it is now, I think everybody has a unified fitness review committee where the local association determines if the particular event in question needs to be a fitness review. And if it does, then it goes to the unified team. And there hasn't been deep discussion about whether there would be one large team, if there would be teams at the regional level. But I think that it would still remain a larger than one association team that did that work, whether it was a regionally unified fitness review team or a conference wide fitness review team. It would still kind of follow the same process that is there for us in the manual that everybody follows now. The team would just have one more step of objectivity. It wouldn't go back to individual associations, except where there's already somewhere in Pennsylvania Southeast, there's an association that did not go with the Unified Fitness Review. Bill might have to speak to that. But I think everywhere else, it's a unified process already. Does that get at what you were asking, Susan?
Yes, and an unrelated question. So the communication with the clergy, with the assumption that the clergy are passing that information along. So let's just start with the situation where we know there's not a clergy, that, not putting aside the clergy that aren't passing it on, where there isn't a clergy, how is the conference at this point, or how are the conferences communicating, and how would that work through with Keystone?
So for Penn Central right now, we keep a list of primary contacts, and often enough with churches that don't have a pastor, if they're in search and call, we have contact people for them, for those churches. So we're aware of who they are. It's very hard to keep a running list of the presidents of consistories and councils because they change so quickly. In some churches, they can be connected they have an office manager or a church email address where somebody actually checks it. So we're hoping for that, but we're open to lots of new ways to make sure that there's connection going on. Paul, do you want to say anything to that about how we communicate with churches that don't have pastors?
Yeah, I have compiled a list of church contacts that are generally static. So things like the office administrator, info at XYZ church, those sorts of email addresses. And whenever I send items to my clergy list, unless it's something that has to be very specifically clergy, it goes to that list as well. So we're hitting both at the same time. Some people are getting, of course, a double dose, but then anyone who doesn't currently have a clergy is hopefully getting that as well, which unfortunately does leave gaps for those churches that don't have those sorts of email addresses set up.
All right, thank you.
Is that enough, Susan, for that?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Other questions? You can either raise your hand or speak out. Okay. Amelia Price.
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions?
Not right now, but thank you.
Okay. I just have to check with you. Go ahead, Mary.
Yes, I'm with North Penn Association, and we currently meet for the general meeting twice a year. And the board meets, I believe, monthly. do you see this requiring for the whole association to meet more frequently? I don't know what other associations do. Will we need to meet more frequently to accomplish all these goals?
That's a really good question. I think that's going to be a decision that's made by the association, either at an association meeting or as part of the executive committee's work. The reason I say that is because some associations are much more engaged on a regular basis than others are. And if that works for you and you can maintain your communication and you seem to be able to make those contacts with everyone to do the work that needs to be done, that's fantastic. Other associations don't meet as often. We have associations in Penn Central that meet once a year. They don't meet twice a year. And it'll be up to them to determine if they do need to meet more often. So it's what works for you to get done what you believe to be your work that you need to complete. And I don't know if that's particularly helpful. Bonnie, where are you? Do you have something you can add to that? Bonnie? I think she's frozen. Does that answer some of that question, Mary?
Yes. What is the general consensus, at least in Penn Central? How often do your associations meet? I just wanted to get a sense of what other people are doing.
Well, Nora can check me on this. I think we have 2 that only meet annually.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. And then the others meet twice a year.
Okay. So there aren't
Spring
people
meeting,
meeting
fall meeting.
four times or 6 times a year. There aren't associations doing that. Okay.
Not for a whole association, no. But the executive committee usually meets every month and then
Yes.
takes summer off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got that. Thank you.
Tammy, you're welcome. Tammy.
I just have a question about the association president and the president's council. I'm very much aware in Central Association, we do have a lot of bivocational pastors.
Yes,
If those pastors are unable to attend or the president unable to attend that meeting, are we allowed to send an additional different representative to represent our association?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Our hope is that it will be the president, but we understand. I mean, we have a number of associations where there's a lot of bivocational.
Okay.
And figure out a way to make it work and be pragmatic about it. Thanks, Tammy.
Mhm.
Others. Let's take a look at the timeline quickly. If you have a question about associations that comes up while we're talking about the timeline, put it in the chat or hold on to it and we will come back to it. Okay. Let's see. This is the timeline that we've put together, and this is a living document, which means that it is consistently updated, and we've worked on keeping it up to date. Much of the information that's at the beginning are things that have already been completed. So we have transitions have been added into the draft bylaws, staffing and finance drafts have been reworked. The mission focus, which some of you have seen for the last town hall, has been clarified. The Keystone domain name being reserved is in the works. The reservation of the Keystone Conference of the United Church of Christ for a new corporation is on hold because we can't do that till 120 days out. So that won't be happening until March. Town halls, information meetings, forums, all of that have been happening in the fall. And I think next week is the very last of the town halls. And then we come to November 9th, 4 days after another vote of consequence. And that is the time when everybody votes. There will be 4 conference meetings happening at the same time. Penn Central's conference meeting starts with looking at our budget and also talking about the Small Town and Rural Church Coalition. That's a big piece of what we'll be doing. And then the vote for Keystone on the motion will be at 11:30. And everybody's going to vote at the same time. And each conference has its own way of figuring out how it's voting. So we'll make sure all of that is covered. If the motion passes, one of the first things that happens is we start working on personnel policies, and we already have governance and so forth and staffing, looking at those things to get that underway. And then each conference has to submit the formal motion to national. So it's very clear that it's coming from all 4 conferences. So we do that so that it gets on the docket for Synod next summer in Kansas City. Then we start looking at some of the other pieces that are going to help us figure out how we actually govern this body. So the determination of the regional areas for staffing is a big part of that. And the hope right now is that will be done in early spring, and that the staffing and governance committee will be looking at that and how to establish what those regional areas are, Then our new conference, Constitution and Bylaws, those are going to be available just after the new year, and we will have town halls about the Constitution and Bylaws also. Those will come out, and those will be voted on at our spring meetings of each of the 4 conferences. And we are not all meeting together like we did last year. We are each meeting on our own, and we will vote on those Constitution and Bylaws. Once that is done, we can start submitting the legal paperwork to the Commonwealth. And we do have a law firm that we're working with who's going to help us with that, that specializes in churches and nonprofit corporations. The Keystone Working Group finishes its work. Let me back up. Sorry, we have the General Synod vote, remember, first in July. And after that is done, we submit the legal paperwork. The working group's job is complete, and so they come to a close. Penn Northeast starts working on transitioning to being an association instead of a conference. That will be a process. We will have a transitional conference board established, and that will choose their own officers, and that will likely have 4 people from each of the previous historical boards. So the boards that are serving right now in each of the conferences. Start putting together a job description for a transitional conference minister. That needs to be done very soon, and the board will then hire or contract that person. That is not a called position. We will also begin the transitional board and officers plan that is in the new bylaws, which we've put in there and you all will be able to see soon. Then we start looking at how the 4 Pennsylvania conferences become historic conferences, and each has to have a skeletal board that stays together. The reason for that is that each conference has its own financial structure, has its own endowed funds and so forth, which need time to be worked through and dealt with. When we're talking about a full-scale merger where everything comes together into one, that takes a long time. And it will take some time. But we'll retain those skeletal boards. By the end of 2025, all 4 conference ministers who are currently serving will be ending their positions. So those positions end at the end of 2025. The Keystone Conference legally and officially would begin on June 1st, 2026. That,
January 1st.
what did I say, June?
June.
Sorry, January 1st, 2026. And the new website, which will be worked on through 2025, will go live on that date. The 3 transitional regional conference ministers will be hired or contracted. Those who are on the staff currently are able to apply for these positions. And our transitional admins will also be contracted. We'll get that transitional staffing plan in place by the end of 2026. It all depends on those searches, how long they take, and what's required of us to get all of that into place. Then the work begins on a description for the settled executive conference minister. That will be a national search. That will not be held just to Pennsylvania, but it will be a national search. And we have our first Keystone Conference annual meeting where we are all together. We've been asked by a few people if this is possibly going to be at Penn State again. And I'm not sure that's going to be the case. We don't want to, excuse me, we don't want to set a precedent that we're always going to be meeting in Penn State, because frankly, that doesn't work for everybody. And we need to move things around so that we can be as fair as possible to the different geographical regions. So we'll be looking at Harrisburg, for example, trying to find something that's very central, that's not necessarily the geographical center of the Commonwealth as Penn State is. So we're going to be pulling together the job descriptions for 3 settled regional conference ministers. We want to get a settled conference minister, executive conference minister in place by January 1st of 2027. That is the hope. And then running the searches for the 3 settled regional conference ministers, which requires the executive conference minister to already be in place. So there can be some back and forth there. And then the hiring of the settled admins, we're talking about this possibly happening with the change to transitional admins so that they're not constantly having to reapply for a position. If it's within the staffing that we already have, we want to make sure that we keep institutional memory. That's a really important piece. So we don't want to lose institutional memory, and our admins are all going to be free to apply for those positions. And it's possible that some of them will go right into transitional and then into settled. See how that works out. So right now, that is our timeline. It's being updated. Things are being added in. All of our current positions are guaranteed through March 1st of 2026. That is something that we set very early on to have some lowering of anxiety on everybody's part about where our current staff are and where they will be. So that is our timeline. And are there any questions specifically about the timeline? It looks very clear and straightforward when it's on a piece of paper. Doesn't mean though that it will be clear and straightforward as we actually go through it, but we have that plan and that's the ideal moving forward. Bonnie, Bill, oh, Amelia, there you are. Go ahead, Amelia.
You didn't really think I wasn't going to say anything, did you?
No.
It's not a question so much as it's a comment. My concern that I have raised has been the workload that people who are doing this work on the ground are going to be expected to pick up. I want to say that this has been very helpful for clarification as to how as you eloquently put, how the pretty things on paper look moving forward. There's been a lot of work and a lot of energy put into that. The concern is still there.
I know.
Because there's a lot of people doing an awful lot of work right now, and
Yes.
the thought of picking up more is hard. And I know you all have been doing that, so I'm beating a drum to name that this is already happening. But this clarification is helpful. It's also giving a shape to what a vision can be of how this moves forward. The concern that I continue to bring is finding the people with the gifts, especially when you're talking about conflict management, especially when you're talking about the kinds of pastoral care that I think Penn Central and Central Association are doing very well in a lot of cases. And I'm personally coming to realize a lot of this is just going to unfold.
Yeah.
We're not going to know until we try to actuate the vision that is on this piece of paper.
Yep.
So I want to say you have eased a bit of anxiety, not all. But that's
Hey,
my
the
own
smallest
problem. It's not
amount is
your
good.
problem. And this has been helpful. So I especially want to end with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. I appreciate that. And I hear your concerns. And one of the things that happens in situations like this is that while more things may be done in one area, fewer things are done in another. And it's a matter of adjustment and adaptation. So that is, and I know that that's going to be difficult for people. That will be. We're not talking about a huge staff for a Keystone conference. And we are going to work hard and do our very best to make this work and energize people to be a part of it. And that is the best I think that we can do as of now. You're right. We're going to see how it's going to unfold. Tammy, did you? Oh, wait, Francis. Hi, Francis. You have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Hi. I just want to make sure I heard correctly. You addressed this. The transitional staff. So the transitional ministers and the staff are all eligible for the settled positions. Did I hear that
That's right.
correctly? Okay.
Yes.
Everybody got it.
That's
Okay,
why they're transitional and not interim.
got it.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Francis. Bonnie, Bill, Nora, other things you'd like to add?
Just do my usual, how we fund this. We would love to have more staff. That would be wonderful. And we know that we have a large geography, although not as large as some other conferences that have that number or fewer of staff. The only way to add additional staff is to increase income. And the only way to increase income, aside from grant writing, which is mostly for new programs, is to have congregations maintain or increase their OCWM giving. We have projected in our budget a decline that's projected nationally. Keeping our staff structure stable is dependent on congregations being in partnership with the associations and the conference. Off my soapbox. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Bill.
Yeah, I guess the reality that I'm facing is that change is happening, and it's going to happen whether we merge or not. The folks in Penn Southeast Conference are confronting some significant regular declines in OCWM. That's going to change the way we have done our ministry historically. And so the question is not is it this, or is it merge or keep doing what we're doing? At least in our conference, we won't be able to keep doing what we're doing. What Carrie, Bonnie, David, and I in the working group and friends who have been contributing to this ministry have tried to do is attempt to create a way forward that acknowledges the current realities that we're dealing with, and to try to set the congregations in Pennsylvania up for as much connection and working together as possible, so that we can continue to provide support and ministry to the local church. I'm also trying to understand a shift in a paradigm that's happened over the last 20, 30 years, and that's conference as a service provider. Conferences were founded to be the gateway to the national church, to the global church, so that we could extend the reach of the local church. And that shift has really become very clear, certainly in my 10 years and even before that. And so what we're bumping up against, Bonnie's already spoken to, and that is that we have fewer services to provide with fewer resources available to us. And that trend is going to continue. So my hope with this coming together is that we increase the pockets of possibility that exist around the state that move us beyond the growing limitations within our own conferences.
Thank you for that very much. In Pennsylvania, we are dependent on our OCWM. That's not the case in every other conference. There are other conferences who have other means of income, mostly from investments and so forth. We don't have that. So we have a dependence on our churches. But being able to function well and do what we can for our churches will always be the number one priority. Other questions? Tammy, did you have your hand up? Oh, Dale. I'm sorry. I just saw you, Dale. Go ahead.
You know, I understand what Bonnie was saying about increasing the OCWM, but you know, we have to realize the true fact is that our congregations are shrinking. And with the congregation shrinkage is lower benevolence coming into the church. And that's the sad part about this. The other part that has me concerned is I agree with you, Carrie, that we have a lot of qualified people in the conferences around the state. The biggest issue, and you go down to the association levels, you can go down to the church level, is getting those competent people to step up and be willing to participate and become involved.
Yes.
I know I've been involved with the Harrisburg Association for years, the committeeal ministry, and it's just trying to get people to fill positions.
Yep.
Qualified people to fill positions is a horrendous task at times.
It is.
And that's my one major concern on the association level. But I just had to mention that because that's going to be a key factor on how well the associations work with everything
Yes.
else.
Yes. And so, like I said before, some associations are more cohesive than others. And one of the reasons that we've talked about possible mergers of associations or parts of associations going with another association is to answer that question of human resources. I know how difficult it is. I hear about this regularly, how difficult it is to get people to serve. And so the more that we can do to share, the more human resources we will have among us. And that's going to become a really important piece. And how do we do that except by sharing or coming together? But I hear you, Dale. I know that it's difficult to find people, and that has been a challenge in Harrisburg in particular. So somebody over here in the corner with it. Dave Bushnell, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I've been connected a little bit with the legacy program of the church board and loan fund. And I just think, and I just would mention this in terms of resources, the amount of money that has been offered through closures in the church, in the UCC in the last couple of years is in the millions of dollars. Now, that's not necessarily going to the conference judicatory or even to the national church, but I think that as we're looking at these difficult times, and if churches are closing, one of the significant pieces, I think, has to be who's going to be working with some of those churches and encouraging gifts that can be used wisely in the future. So I think that, and I know that's been a concern, and I know there's a pretty good document from Penn Southeast about church closures. But I just offer that as a little bit maybe of good news out of the bad news for the future financially.
Yeah, and that, as you know, I mean, I know you know this, Dave, that it depends so much on the relationship with the church and what the conference has been to the church in terms of whether any of that funding goes to the conference. And oftentimes it doesn't, as we know. But the more that we can have really hands-on, excellent connection with churches that are moving towards closure, the better that will be, because we'll be able to talk about options very openly. And that is what we need to do. And the legacy program is great. We've also got some new resources for churches that are looking at ending their ministry. So we're going to be offering all of that. And my hope is that we might have a handful of people, probably call on you for this, that you might have a handful of people who will be able to help churches that are making this kind of decision and moving in this kind of direction. Because we're going to need people who can help our churches with this. Others. Well, we're at 3:58, so that's pretty excellent in terms of timing. I just want to say again that if you have questions or concerns, if something pops into your mind later on, please send an email. Please get in touch. We will respond. We want to respond and want to hear what you're thinking about. Otherwise, I'm hoping that most of the people on this call are delegates and that you will be active and present wherever you serve on November 9th. So blessings to all of you, and thank you for being here this afternoon very much. Have a good rest of the day.